Hi, I'm Adam Porter and this is my board gaming vlog, and we're looking at my top 100 board games, dice games, card games, tabletop games that I enjoy, games that I have a particular emotional connection to. And here we're into the top 50, so this is the really fantastic games we're now reaching. And none of my games are allowed on this list, so none of the games that I've published make it onto the list. Although they would be in the top 50, definitely, because I would play any of them at any time. I absolutely love them, obviously, because I created them and I have huge emotional connection to these games. But the first game on the list is, at number 50, is a game called Broom Service. This is from Alia. It's from designer Alexander Pfister and Andreas Pelikan. And this is it's a sort of simultaneous selection game. So you're simultaneously choosing which action you want to take, and you can either choose to take the brave action or the cowardly action. Okay, the brave action is going to get you more, but if somebody else also chooses to take that brave action, then you're not going to get it. Whereas if you go for the cowardly action, then you are going to get it, but it's a weaker version of what you want. And what we're trying to do is pick up items, potions, deliver them around the board to various different locations. But everything comes down to that card play and trying to work out what the other players are trying to achieve. It's got this nice sort of witches theme, delivering potions. That works very well. It's a good game with larger player counts. You know, you're playing it with 3 is absolutely fine, but there's a 2-player game. I think it's a little bit lacking. But it just feels really, really unique. And I like the art style. You know, it doesn't leap out at you or anything like that, but this sort of hand-drawn images, it's quite an attractive one, which is unusual for Alia because they're not games that are known for their looks. But this one's really quite nice. I think number 49 is an abstract strategy game called Yinch. Now, previously on the list, there have been the games Quarto and Goblet, abstract strategy games, but Yinch is from the GIF series. These feel a little bit more, I don't know, like they've got a little bit more depth maybe than the Gigamic wooden games. Maybe that's unfair. Maybe it's just that they've got a different aesthetic to them. Really, I could have picked any of the GIF series of games. There's a whole range of games in this series called GIF, and the original idea was that you could you know, if you won a game of one of them, it would give you a playing piece that you could use in another one of these games. So you could play one massive meta game, you know, one massive mega game which combines aspects of all the different games. I've never done that, but I do like the individual games. Yinch is the one that's connected with me the most. Essentially, we're moving pieces to try and reverse pieces from white to black or from black to white in order to score rows of pieces, and then eliminate what happens then is you eliminate some of your playing pieces from the board. So as you're winning, things get more difficult for you. So it's got this great catch-up mechanism in it. The rules are really simple. The game is attractive, and it's a game that you can really you feel like you could master if you really spent the time working at it. So this is a serious game, but that's not to say that it's not a fun game. But really, you could look at any of the games in this series. You know, Tsar, Gipf, Link, Punkt, any of them. They're all good games. But Yinch is the one that particularly connects with me. Number 48 on the list is one that's probably very familiar to you if you've been following the hobby over the last couple of years, because it's been a bit of a mega hit, and that's the game Everdell. So Everdell is a beautiful game about little woodland creatures, lovely, lovely artwork, but there's actually a decent game in there. You've got worker placement, so you're placing out your characters to take certain actions and blocking those spots from the other players so they can't get them. You're gathering resources, berries and twigs and, you know, various things in order to build these little woodland creatures, their locations that they're going to live in, and you're building up a tableau of cards, so laying out a display of cards on the table in front of you, and they've all got different abilities that will combine with each other to make you more and more powerful as the game goes on. It's relatively simple, although it has got a little bit of complexity to it, but the components are just really, really attractive, and it draws people in. There's a load of expansions. I haven't explored all of those expansions. I've only got the one, which is Pearlbrook, which I'm told is the least good expansion, but I quite enjoyed it. But yeah, it's a really good, appealing game, Everdell. Number 47 is the game Fauna. Fauna is a trivia game by Friedemann Fries. Do you know what? I previously remember talking about Power Grid by Friedemann Fries and saying that it was his best game, but clearly it's not, because Fauna is higher up the list. And actually, Fauna is part of a range of games that includes the game Terra, and I think there's Terra has trivia about different events all around the world and different locations around the world, whereas Fauna, all the trivia is about animals. I think there's one about Germany, I think there's one about America. Obviously I haven't dived into those because I don't know much about America and Germany in terms of trivia. But the great thing about these trivia games is that you don't have to know that much, and in fact nobody knows that much about all these animals. When we're trying to work out, what is its tail length and which part of the world does it live in, this obscure creature that's showing on this card, the thing you have to do is guess. But the great thing in the game is that if somebody else has guessed, you can then copy their guess and go sort of somewhere near it. If I may be right, in which case I'll get full points, or it may be that I'm close, in which case I'll get some points, not as much. But the same thing with the tail length. Somebody's gone for this tail is 1 foot long. Well, maybe I'll go for it's 11 inches long, So I might be right. I might be close. And so I might get some points by copying somebody else's answer. And that's what's really fun about it. It's great that, generally people don't know this stuff. They don't know this trivia. So everybody's kind of guessing together. But then it is funny when somebody goes out on a limb and says something, and then everyone else goes, well, that's crazy. Why did you come to that? And you do get those moments in it as well. It's party-ish, but it feels like a board game as well, because we're laying out cubes on a big map of the world. I think this is great. I think it's the best trivia game that I know, and that goes for Terra as well. And I suspect the German and American versions are good too. I just haven't played them. Number 46 is the game Wingspan by Stonemaier Games. I do like Stonemeyer's approach to their games, and Wingspan has just taken the world by storm. It's just been a mega hit over the last couple of years. It won the Kennerspiel des Jahres, and it's just sold a ton. And it's really nice to see, because this is a game that takes itself seriously. It's got all these beautiful artwork of birds, but they're not sort of characterized birds, they're not cartoony birds, it's not aimed at children. It's a theme that you'd think some people might find a bit boring, but yet it's sold an absolute ton. The mechanisms of the game, each individual card has a special ability on it, and those special abilities often relate really well to what you would imagine that bird might actually do. There's expansions coming out for it, lots of support for this game. It's an engine building game, so when I'm laying out these birds, these special abilities form combos, so I can then chain a bunch of different actions that generate me stuff, that generates me more stuff, that means I get better and better throughout the game, and that's always really satisfying. I really enjoy that engine building aspect. The production is fantastic. The pieces are really high quality. It's a stellar production. It's really good. Number 45 on the list is the game Welcome To. This is I'm calling all of these games roll and write, even though, again, this game, like we talked about silver and gold previously, Welcome To does not have any dice in it. We're turning over cards, and then we're selecting which cards we want to use, and placing those numbers onto a sheet of paper in order to fill up, districts or whatever it's supposed to be in a neighbourhood, and then scoring points in a variety of different ways. It's one of those games where you could have any number of people playing it, really, because you just generate the cards, they lay out the cards on the table, and then everyone has their own sheet, and there's no real interaction there. But that's quite nice. It feels like you're sitting down with a sheet of paper. It almost could be like a crossword puzzle that you've taken out of the paper. You're sitting and doing it, but you're doing it together. There's other people doing it at the same time, and you're competing because at the end of it, you're going to get a score. The theme's really nice. It's a nice portable sort of game, pretty simple. I really like it. The artwork's fantastic. I think it's a really appealing package. So Welcome To, one of the best roll and writes out there. Number 44 is the game Patchwork. This is a tile-laying game from Uwe Rosenberg, and this has Tetris-type pieces, polyomino pieces, that you're fitting onto a board to build up a quilt, and the buttons on the tiles are really important. because every now and then they're going to generate you buttons, which are a currency which you can spend to buy more tiles to add onto your board. But each tile that you take also has a little time marker on it, and this is going to advance you up the time track. And so, the further up the track you go, the longer it'll be before it's your turn again. And so the other player might then grab a few tiles. And you're obviously trying to fill up your board as best you can, because you're going to lose points for any spaces that you've left on there. It's really satisfying. It's just for 2 players. Really pretty. It's, I think as a 2-player game, for couples or something like that, it's nice. It's just competitive enough that it's never nasty, but you just feel like you're interacting enough, and you're creating something really quite attractive at the same time. I think it's become a classic, hasn't it? Patchwork is one of the best polyomino games, one of the best Tetrisy games, but it is for 2 players only. Number 43 is Magic Maze. Magic Maze is one of those games where you just have this totally innovative new mechanism in it that just blows you away. In this game, you're not allowed to speak to each other. And each player, you're playing cooperatively, and each player can move the player tokens on the board, but they can only move it in one direction. So I can move any playing piece, but I can only move them left. Somebody else can move any playing piece, but they can only move them right. Someone else can move them up, someone can move them down. And we're trying to get them from one location to another in order to reveal new tiles, to get them to a location that they need to be at in order to win the game, and so on. And you're doing it all under massive time pressure. Every now and then, if you get to a certain location, you can stop the clock and you can have a quick chat about your strategy, but then you have to put the clock back on and off you go again. It's really, really satisfying. It's silly, fun. You get so frustrated when people aren't doing the things that you want them to do, but you can't speak. But what you are allowed to do is tap this little red token in front of them on the table to tell them, right, I want you to do something, but they don't know what you're asking them to do. So it could be frustrating. But there's a whole load of sort of graded difficulty levels, something like 20 odd different ways to play the game with increasing sort of complexity of the rules. So loads of replayability, and as you get better and better at the game, you can challenge yourself more and more. Really good game, Magic Maze. Number 42 is Untold Adventures Await, which is a storytelling game. It's one of those things where you wouldn't really call this a board game because you don't play it competitively at all. What you're doing is making up a story together, but it really, really helps you to do so. Of all the gaming components I have, I don't think any are quite as beautiful as the Rory Story cubes. I've got a set of Rory Story cubes. I've got loads of them in a nice little case, and I just love them as a component. Just having a different image on each side of the cube. I mean, the basic game of Rory Story cubes is you'd roll a handful of cubes, and then you'd make up a story using the images that you could see. That's it. It's an exercise for parents and children, or classrooms, or anybody really to roll these dice and then make up a story with the images that you see, connecting them together with whatever it inspires in you. But Untold Adventures Await puts that into a sort of structure where we have, different acts of that story and different characters that recur, and you can turn it into a longer running sort of campaign of different connected stories. It's a toolkit really for telling structured stories with a beginning, a middle and an end, recurring themes, recurring characters. It really aspires to the storyteller in me. I used to do a lot of improvisational theatre, and a lot of the techniques used in this board game are the same sort of techniques that we would use when sort of spontaneously creating a story on stage. I don't do any of that sort of stuff anymore, but I did back in the days when I was an actor, and this really connected with me, this game. I haven't played it often. It's not one that I find easy to get to the table because most of my friends are board gamers. They're not storytellers. But then every now and then, there are some of my friends that are storytellers, and when we can come together and sit around and make up a story together, it's so inspiring. We have such a good time, such a laugh playing it. I love this package. I love this toolkit, and those cubes are just the most magnificent component. I've tried to think of ways to incorporate Rory Story cubes into other games. How could I create a game that uses those images? And I've never come up with anything half as good as Untold Adventures Await. Number 41 on the list is a silly, silly party game. It's called Identik, or sometimes it's called Duplik, depending on which country you get it from. Now, if you're going to play a drawing game, my suggestion to you would be to play Doodle Rush. Okay, Doodle Rush is my drawing game that I created, where you're drawing pictures and then other people are trying to guess what they are. Simple, right? You'd think that was the only way to do a drawing game, wouldn't you? I draw a picture and somebody else guesses. That's how they work. That's how Pictionary works. That's how Telestrations works. But this one doesn't work like that. And that's what I love about it. Identic or Duplik works very differently. What happens here is you've got a really weird picture that's drawn on a card, and one player can see it. And they've got to describe it. It's really surreal, these pictures, but they've got to describe the picture and what's happening in the picture to all the other players. And the other players, meanwhile, under time pressure, are trying to draw the information that they're being given. And then at the end, the player who has the card will have to read out a bunch of questions that they haven't seen, saying things like, you know, what is this character wearing on his left shoe? How many buttons has he got? What can you see in the background? You know, a whole series of questions. And then the other players score points based on whether they've got those in their drawings or not. And of course, that depends on whether the person who's got the drawing in front of them accurately describes what the picture shows. But there's so much on these images, they can't possibly describe everything. And the way they describe them creates the most, you know, when people reveal the picture that they've drawn and you compare it to the original, it's so funny. You know, I've had a great time with Identik or Duplik. It's one of my favourite party games to bring out when you've got a large group around, and it never fails to create a whole ton of laughs. So second best drawing game of all time after Doodle Rush is Identik or Duplik. Okay, so let's see what that's done to our leaderboards. So starting with publishers, in our top 50, we had Rio Grande ahead with Zoc Verlag leading over Matago and Hans im Gluck. So what's happened when we add 10 more into the list? Nothing much has changed in that particular list. So moving on to designers, we had Phil Walker-Harding and Andreas Seyfarth ahead of a bunch of other fantastic designers. And as we add in another 10 games, the situation doesn't really change. Phil Walker-Harding and Andreas Seyfarth, but we get more people coming into the mix, like Friedemann Fries and Uwe Rosenberg sneaking in to the bottom of that list there. Moving on to themes, we had fantasy out ahead with Ancient World and Anthropomorphic Animals following up. But as we add in another 10, so we're now looking at numbers 41 to 100, and we've got fantasy out ahead, then Anthropomorphic Animals, Ancient World, Natural Disasters, and we've got some spooky games sneaking in there and some games based around homes and neighbourhoods in there at the bottom, things like Dream Home and Welcome To. Finally, looking at game styles, so we had tile-laying games and area majority games ahead, with network building and time pressure behind them. Well, now time pressure is out in front, so we've got 7 games in the 60 games we've looked at so far, which feature time pressure heavily in the game mechanisms, and area majority following up with 6 games, and network building with 5. Party games sneaking in there at the bottom with 4, and tile-laying, dice games and stock holding. So there we are, there's the first 60 games and what that's done to the leaderboards. So let's see what happens when we add in another 10 when we look at the games 31 to 40.